Well, Clive Weston's career in working with wine spans 40 years, based in the UK and here. Back in the 80s, he was on the other side of the world importing New World wines, as I think they were called then. After immigrating to New Zealand in 87, he joined the other side, Negotiants New Zealand Fine Wine Shippers, and is Managing Director of Nautilis Estate in Malborough. Now, Clive is Director of New Zealand Wine Growers USA Limited, which under the catch cry complexity, and you may remember seeing that label this morning on Peter Crisp's presentation, so it was one of the things he put up with talking about companies getting into markets together. So under this complexity label, Clive is part of that, promoting New Zealand high-end wines in the United States. Please welcome Clive Weston.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Susan, for the introduction, also to Business New Zealand and to the EMA. So the subject is sustaining success in the global wine industry through collaboration. And as has been mentioned, there's a cluster group called Complexity. There's another group of winemakers in New Zealand called the Specialists. These are winemakers who only produce a single variety and have banded together, such as Nick Nobelar's Gewürztraminer from Ormond, called Venoptima. Wooing Tree is another example down in Otago, where they only produce a Pinot Noir. So they've found a common thread and banded together. And my approach right now is to allude really to a collaboration of 12 independent, privately owned New Zealand wineries. We'll just cover off here what we're going to talk about. So I just want to talk about the trading environment in which we've found ourselves, seeding the notion that collaboration actually can be effective, what we went through in terms of setup, implementation, the activities that we've participated in, and really what we've found to be the benefits of working together, and then I'll summarise and conclude. So it's a pretty competitive industry we've got here in New Zealand, 4 million people, but we've got 700 wineries or thereabouts. Those 700 wineries produce multiple sub-brands, and within each sub-brand set maybe as many as 5 or 6 different varieties. So if you actually multiply things out, we're talking of thousands of labels produced within New Zealand. As such, with the exception of the smallest producers, pretty well everyone is dependent on export sales for growth. The difficulty we've got, of course, is that the world's a cluttered place. It's an oversupplied market already. And if we contemplate perhaps that we're competing with the likes of France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Chile, Argentina, California, Oregon, South Africa, and of course our friends across the ditch, you can see that she's a pretty tough road to hoe. We're less than 1% of the total world wine market, and we're a relative newcomer against so much more longer established producer countries. And of course, for us and probably everyone in this room, foreign exchange is a key issue, and trying to ensure that we establish and maintain the targeted retail price points is critical. So the notion was basically that in a cluttered sector, there was need for differentiation. You might say the sort of cream needed to rise to the top, and we've been doing a lot of talking about milk today, but we're now talking wine, and I use that analogy certainly. That any impactful overseas marketing activity is costly if you're to tackle it on your own. And the view was taken that perhaps there was strength in numbers, and therefore that a collaborative joint effort would be more effective than going it alone. Importantly, because the members of this cluster have already got importers in the key markets for wine who really take care of sales, it really is not a selling exercise. Profitable sales, of course, are the end game, but this was more about a marketing exercise to create an environment, if you like, in which people would follow us and follow our brands. So, in terms of setup, with 700 producers in the country, it was quite difficult to try to identify, what was a sensible number of producers that could get together, and 12 seemed like the right kind of number. Enough variation to have some impact, but not so many that our efforts would become too diluted. We needed to agree on the balance of the portfolio so that when we played a game in a marketplace together, we were seen to represent a true snapshot of the total New Zealand wine field. So we needed to ensure that the members of this cluster took in the key regions of winemaking or production, that the lead grape varieties for which New Zealand is developing a reputation were covered, and also that all three volume categories as defined by New Zealand Wine Growers, the official industry body, those three categories were also taken into account. So we had from the smallest boutique producer to a much larger company like, say, Villa Maria. And we had to agree on the criteria for membership and who should be in, probably more importantly, who should be out. But that was the source of some pretty lusty debate, as you can probably imagine. It was important that we agreed on a charter and a code of conduct. The agreement was that we should be export focused, and that our funds should go to export. So if we were to participate in any activity within New Zealand as a collaborative group, it would be cost neutral at worst. We didn't want to take the funds that we'd allocated for export and say, well, we'll swing 20% of that into work in the domestic market. So by way of example, in this marketplace, we've joined together, we did a presentation and a tasting with Macquarie Bank, Private Wealth. We ran a series of winemaker dinners in alternate months at Dine by Peter Gordon. We set up a pop-up bar in the atrium of Sky City throughout the Rugby World Cup. And each of those measures brought attention to our brands, but effectively the exercises were cost neutral. We also agreed that we should open our minds and accept outside of advice as to the best way forward. So we engaged some marketing consultants to bounce ideas off. So we set up a company, F12 Limited, and we identified the right rules and the instruments of that business, and we had to agree on a trading name. So that's us, that's the family of 12, independent, family-owned, artisanal producers. We've been notoriously referred to as the Gang of 12. We've been referred to as the Dirty Dozen, of course. But we are a family. We are a family of 12 wine producers. It was important we agreed a funding mechanism, clearly. And the key message was to be patient. Whilst we had sown the seed of the idea, we said, well, we're not going to rush into this and actually go to market until we've got all of the above points properly locked away. We've got a cast iron charter, a constitution that as such is set in stone. The objective being to ensure that the venture would be long-term and that there would be no divorce. So in August 2003, we had our first round tabling one afternoon down in Hawke's Bay among a number of friendly competitors. The phone had been buzzing around, people trying to identify like-minded companies that we felt maybe there'd be a healthy synergy with. And we sat around the table. We got a couple of ex-Saatchi & Saatchi advertising gurus to come in and share their thoughts. Was what we were thinking about going to work? What would the pitfalls be? And they provided some very helpful steerage for us. But really the next 18 months was spent on the legalese and on evolving the constitution. It took that long to work through everything to ensure that we had absolutely everything covered and it was watertight. We consulted with NZTE. I gather Peter Crisp was here earlier on, and certainly an export grant from NZTE did allow us to do much more than we could have done on our own in terms of the initial setup, particularly with regards to evolving our brand, evolving our logo, and evolving our collateral. It was very important to us prior to any public announcement that we discussed our intentions with the official industry body, New Zealand Wine Growers, which represents every winery in the country. We were particularly concerned that, in a sense, that we would have their blessing for what we were doing, and we did not want to, quite obviously, be viewed by our peers who weren't members of the group as a splinter group. We needed everyone to be pretty well on side, not least the domestic media, journalists, wine writers especially. There would be nothing worse than our friendly Kiwi wine writers hearing second-hand from a wine writer or a blog from the States that we were in San Francisco promoting our wares, and we hadn't had the courtesy to let our local wine writers know what was going on. So July 2005, we set off for our first outbound activities. We took in San Francisco, New York, and London. We've subsequently been to Dublin, to Chicago, to Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore, Hong Kong, and most recently this year we took a stand at Provine in Germany, which is the largest, I think, 7 halls of wine exhibitors from all over the world, and we took a stand there. We also decided that money could be just as well spent, and in some cases better spent, in terms of bang for buck, by bringing key influencers, sommeliers, wine writers, restaurateurs and retailers into and giving them a 12 winery tour in about 10 days, which every time we've done it, the feedback's been phenomenal. And they become lifelong ambassadors, not only for the 12 wineries, but I think for brand New Zealand and brand New Zealand wine. We, as one has to do these days, we've evolved a website, we're active on social media, and we meet 3 times a year around the family table just to have a bit of a yarn and try to plan our next course of action. So there's just a collage of some of us overseas. I think that's mainly last October, November's foray into Asia via Melbourne. We dropped off into Melbourne for a day for a tasting, met with sommeliers, and then carried on to Singapore, where we did presentations to wine writers and on to Hong Kong. So the benefits, some of which I've touched on, we agreed that we would only use our top labels. I mentioned before that most wineries have 2 or 3 different subsets of brands. It was important to us that we were showcasing the very best of New Zealand. So we agreed that we would only show our top labels whenever the family participate in an event. 12 is the standard package for a case of wine, and that actually meant that trade and consumers could relate quite easily to the concept of 12 wineries, each with a bottle of wine in a case. And curiosity. The concept of competitors working together for the common good strikes a chord, and it really has taken some markets by surprise. In Singapore, it is very much dog eat dog. There are hundreds of importers, and they simply don't talk to each other. I'd go so far as to say that they almost hate each other. So when we turned up there on the first night, we thought, well, how are we going to break the ice here? Because between the 12 of us, let's say on average in most markets we have 6, say half a dozen importers representing the 12. We decided that we would get the Singapore importers into one room, private room in a restaurant with the 12 of us, and make peace. And that sort of set the tone for the next couple of days of promotional activities. And by the end of it, they were all great mates and wondering, I think, why on earth they were at war the whole time, when in that actual fact collaboration was working perfectly well. Pooling of experience and intellectual horsepower, that's been a significant benefit for the family. Leadership positioning for the 12. We were the first cluster group in the wine industry in New Zealand, and I mentioned before that others are now following. So the specialists I alluded to, and complexity, another group. Our winery Nautilis is in both complexity in the States and in the family of 12 in other markets, but because we believe it's a good way to go. And a spin-off into non-marketing learnings. So what began as a marketing exercise, we're now saying, well, hang on, what about our winemakers and our viticulturalists getting together? So we have a viticulture and a winemaking field day at one of our 12 wineries each year, covering subjects such as organics, minimising water usage in growing vines. There are various topics that have been covered, but that's been a real spin-off. Purchasing power, 12 of us getting together to speak to the carton manufacturers or the glass manufacturers to negotiate a bulk collective buy price. Back office export-based processes and systems, 12 wineries all exporting to many countries around the world, but are we actually all doing it the best way in terms of our back office processes and systems? So we've recently held a meeting down in Wellington where the office ladies and guys who are the ones who have to sort of fill in all the documentation and meet the regs of different import countries, they sat around the table and thrashed things out. And pretty well all 12 of us got something new out of that day, a better way for us to do things. That last point, certainly if you're a member of the wine business, you'll understand that, it is a great community, and certainly camaraderie and bonhomie, having fun is a key part of what we're about. So I mentioned before that when we're active and we're out in market, certainly it's good for us, but we think it's good for the industry. It's good for brand New Zealand produce. It was interesting with the previous presentation there talking about New Zealand food, and absolutely wine and food go hand in hand. So we make a point of working closely with the likes of King Salmon, with Soleri Merino lamb, and New Zealand cheese producers as examples. And I think, of course, benefits to the whole of New Zealand. So really just in summary for you, the global wine industry is an oversupply and is cluttered with brands. Our 700 wineries make up less than 1% of production, so we need to stand out. 12 premium producers banded together as a marketing group, the family of 12, but it took 18 months to establish a rock-solid charter, constitution and rules to keep us honest. We were very keen to avoid any industry splinter group mentality, and the benefits of the exercise continue to build into more areas than just marketing. Others have followed. Markets have been surprised but excited to find competitors working together. So just in conclusion, for like-minded businesses in certain industries, more will be achieved on a more cost-effective basis through collaboration than by attempting to take on the world alone. So take a look around, see if such entities exist, and get together over a glass of great New Zealand wine to discuss the opportunity. Thanks and good luck.